Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. We're just going to go over some of the comments on this video, Altruism and Irrationality. We talked about Ed Powell's comment yesterday. I mentioned it in International Hangout, if I remember right. And so I made a reply to his comment. And I was a little worried about him being possibly a little bit D-type and just sort of wanting to disintegrate anything I pointed out, any integration I made, any similarities I see. He just knocks them down. He doesn't care. He just wants to just bust everything apart and say that there's no similarities and we can't understand or learn anything from it. Everything's different. Okay, so here's his new comment. He says, I still think you're committing the fallacy of the excluded middle by asserting that all ethical theories aren't explicitly egoist, that all explicitly that aren't explicitly egoist are by definition altruist. Well, that is part of the claim that I'm making, that you cannot, if an ethic is not egoistic, then it's altruistic. And altruism isn't particularly meaningful aside from the fact that it's irrational. That's really the salient point about altruism. Now, a lot of you 9-9s, we'll go look at that comment in a second. 9-9s says that the essence of altruism is other-directed action. But I can't find that. I mean, you could say that ethically, that people acting altruistically, ethically, have other people as their motive. You can say that, but then I'm just going to point out that what they're doing is irrational and self-destructive. So, let's see. Ayn Rand said the motivation for an action does not change the nature of an action. Right? Just because you're motivated by whatever, fill in the blank. You're motivated by the desire for your child to have a good life, so you cut off her genitalia. Right? The motivation for the action doesn't change the nature of the action. All right? Because you're motivated by helping other people does not change the nature of the fact that it's an irrational and self-destructive action. All right? All right, so returning to Ed here, he says, it's not true either philosophically or historically that all ethical theories that aren't explicitly egoist are altruist. It's not true either philosophically or historically. Now, I'm not going to make a big stand historically because altruism was invented in the 1800s. But if altruism is just a name for acting irrationally in ethics, then of course they didn't invent that in the 1800s, right? They just invented the term. But acting irrationally in ethics is essentially the metaphysical nature of altruism. Okay? Irrational ethical actions. Okay? Duty ethics dominated Western history, including the United States through its entire history. And in this ethics, men have certain duties, but other than these, they can act egoistically. All right, Ed Powell, you're pointing out a contradiction in our culture. Now, how does that contradict my statement that irrational actions cannot be separated from altruistic actions or vice versa? So our culture had a contradiction. Okay. To the extent that it followed the egoistic side, it was a very good culture. To the extent that it followed altruism, it was a bad and getting worse culture. Okay. See, this is why I'm afraid that he's slightly D-type and just wants to knock down any integration, any point, anything that I say, oh, I've learned this, or I think I noticed that. He just knocks it down and says, look, he hasn't even gotten to the worst of it. Let's keep going. That right there is the ethics of the United States from the 1600s to the 1960s, when radicals introduced Marxism and all this stuff. Calling the United States before 1960 egoist is simply not true. So what would it be? Duty ethical? All right? It was certainly one of the most egoistic societies in the history of the world. Ed Powell, if we couldn't describe the the United States as egoist before 1960. Can we ever describe any society in the history of the world as egoist? Well, he says it was partially egoist. You see, there's the D type. Okay, so it had a contradiction in it. Can't we think about this, Ed? Can't you think about this and move this thought forward in your brain? I set this thought up and I say the United States was egoist. No, it wasn't. It was partially egoist. I say that the United States had the essence of altruism in its culture. No, it wasn't. It was partially egoist. See? So you're just going to knock... If I say it's egoist, you say no, it had altruism. If I say they had altruism, you say no, they had egoism too. You're just going to knock down everything I say? Can't you think about this stuff, Ed? All right. Given that no other country has ever had even a quarter of the egoism the U.S. had, your position reduces to... There we go. The United States is more egoistic than anybody else. Saying that it was egoist is simply not true. No other country has ever had more egoism than the United States. All right. Okay, whatever. I mean, what point are you making? All right. He says, so this is what my position reduces to, according to Ed Powell. Everyone believed in altruism all the time. No, that is not what my position reduces to. Which is both not true and not useful for analytical purposes. Okay, you fail, Ed. That is not what I said. One must disaggregate to understand better in almost all fields, and ethics is no... There he is. He wants to disaggregate things. Ed, what are you going to do when everything's disaggregated? Do you propose to put it back together ever? Do you propose to put it together in any way at all? Or you're just going to disaggregate things and then learn about them? So Ed's slightly D2 type. I would not be surprised to learn that he is an upleftivist. Now, I haven't seen Chris Ewing's comment, so let's do it here. It came up while I was in bed last night. Devil's advocate. What benefit am I getting from holding a door open for somebody? Well, I would say that you get the benefit of appearing to be polite. You get the benefit of interacting with somebody who you want to be polite to. It's not a big deal. It's not a sacrifice for you. It is manners. It's living in a civilized society. It's sending a message to the person that you acknowledge them. Now, you're not like handing them a $100 bill or paying their bills for them or anything like that. You just held the door open for them. If it's a pretty lady, then you get to sit there and look at her while she goes by. So there's lots of things you can get from holding a door open for somebody, and it's a very, very minimal sacrifice. All right? And I use the word sacrifice just to give you guys something to bite if you want to fight me. But it's not a sacrifice, obviously. What have you given up? And if it is a sacrifice for you, then keep walking. Don't worry about it. All right. What benefit am I getting from holding the door open? This does not benefit me in any way. Wrong. Okay. It's very, very minimal. It's approximately on order of the sacrifice you made to get the benefit. Extremely minimal. It's simply a matter of good manners. All right. I wouldn't call it self-destructive. No, it's not self-destructive. You're building up your attitude and your self-respect, and you're helping other people feel like the world is a mannerly and benevolent place. You know, think of the word benevolence. People shutting doors and dropping doors in other people's faces is not a benevolent society. That's what happens in Moscow. Nobody ever holds a door open for anybody else for any reason in Moscow, because everybody else are just scumbags and screw them all. But in a benevolent society like the United States, you have respect for other people. And at some point you might start to disrespect them if you hear what they're saying or whatever, but we give everybody the benefit of the doubt until we get to know them. Or that's generally been the United States culture for a long time. Connecticut's different than that. You just assume everybody is an asshole out to kill you in Connecticut until you learn otherwise. And you pretty much never find any good people. Connecticut's a very bad place. Alright. So the United States isn't as great as it used to be, and people don't hold doors open for people in Connecticut. Keep in mind, I don't know this person. Right. So you're not going to make a big sacrifice for them, are you? You might just stand there holding the door for just a second. Right? It's not a big deal. You're not going to do something that takes you more than 4 seconds. If you have to stand there and hold the door for 15 seconds while they come down some stairs or something, that would be strange, wouldn't it? You should just go on your way. You are separated from that person. Okay? So don't worry about it. This is not a big deal. All right. So I am not giving up a value for a lesser value or no value at all in this situation. You could call it benevolence, but then you would have to explain the difference between benevolence and altruism. Okay, benevolence is simply viewing other people as good until you have some reason not to. Okay? Altruism is viewing yourself as bad. Right? There's a huge difference. In order to be benevolent, you have to be egoistic. All right? No altruistic people are benevolent because they regard everybody around them as having more of a claim on their stuff than they themselves have. Right? They regard themselves as any bite of food that an altruist takes was needed more by some other person somewhere around the world. Right? Anything that an altruist enjoys was needed as much or more by somebody else. So every single bit of pleasure in an altruist's life is guilty. So altruists can't be benevolent. Egoists are the only ones that can be benevolent. Okay? That's why people in America hold the door open for other people, but not in Moscow. One of the synonyms for benevolence is altruism. Okay, well that is not true. That is just not true. That is fake news. That is a lie. That is confusion. That is like saying that one of the synonyms for goodness is altruism. And that is just strange. So I pose the question to you, Mr. Cropper, if holding doors open for people is altruism and altruism is irrational, then am I being irrational? No, holding doors open for people is benevolence, not altruism. Alright. Next. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll put benevolence down as anything that doesn't really come at a cost to you but gives you a perceived benefit. And the 5 seconds it takes you to hold the door is no perceived cost. 15 seconds to hold the door would be a perceived cost, so just go on your way if they're more than 5 seconds from the door, or maybe more than 2 or 3 seconds from the door. Then just don't worry about them. It's not that big a deal. Okay, 9.9 says on the next video here. Oops, what? Altruism doesn't just mean self-destructive. It specifies other directed actions. So here we are with the motivation thing, right? The action of a motivation doesn't change the nature of it. The motivation of an action doesn't change the nature of an action. It specifies other directed actions. It's about making other people the motive of one's action. Again, the motive doesn't change the nature. Altruism is one form of irrationality, but there are many forms of irrationality that have nothing to do with other people. Well, here's an interesting point, though. Could you be altruistic without anybody else being around? Now, if you could sacrifice your values without anybody being around, then that would mean that you don't need it to be other directed action. So who would you sacrifice to? If altruism is self-sacrificial, other-directed, what if I allow you to direct the other of being the other of God, and you self-sacrifice for God? Is that altruism? Or do you say that's not altruism? Because if that's altruism, then you can stand on a desert island, you could kill a bird for your dinner or catch a fish for your dinner, and then incinerate it in the fire to make the gods happy, to hopefully get a boat to come to take you off of the island. Right? And that was your only hope to survive. Now tomorrow you're going to be too weak to even go catch another fish, but you've burned it up as an offering to the gods. Now you might say that's mistaken selfishness or egoism. So what if I say he burned half the fish and then just became weaker because he believed he should share it with the gods? So if there's a way to be altruistic or to be self-destructive and other-directed on a desert island with nobody around, then the nature of altruism really can be brought down to self-destructiveness. Alright, now the next one. I don't know, it sounds like an arbitrary expansion of the definition of altruism. Now again, I'm not defining the definition of altruism. Altruism still means other-directed action ethically. When you're talking about ethics, it still means your actions supposedly are directed towards other people. All right, we can keep that. I'm just saying that metaphysically speaking, there is no difference at all between altruism and irrationality. Metaphysically, epistemologically speaking, there's no difference, okay? I looked up altruism in the lexicon. Every entry talks about it in terms of sacrificing for the sake of others. Yes, but do the others get any benefit? If you say no, of course they don't get any benefit. Then okay, then what is the real essence of the action here? It doesn't have anything to do with other people, does it? You can take or leave the other people. Like I said, you can have a guy on a desert island and he could still do something self-sacrificial, thinking that it's bad for him to keep that stuff for himself. He has to give it up to somebody else or something else. Okay? So sacrificing for the sake of others just means not for you. It could mean the gods, it could mean for the mosquitoes and birds and fishes and trees. And if you sacrifice for the mosquitoes and birds and fishes and trees by buying solar panels, the joke is on you, because they had to run a coal-fired power plant to make those solar panels, and they used up more coal than that solar panel will ever produce in electricity. So you have polluted the world by buying your solar panel. The joke is on you. Just because you think you're making a sacrifice to save the birds and fishes and trees doesn't mean you actually are. It simply means you're making a sacrifice. Okay, the concept of altruism as, let's do this one. Alter, as in alternative, or alter ego, means other. Yes, altruism means otherism, specifically anti-self. So really, the metaphysical nature of the meaning of the word is just anti-self, right? Because you can be, your actions aren't for others. What actions in the Soviet Union were for other people? Right? No, they were against, everything's against other people when you're irrational. Just because you say on the surface of your stupid theory that you're doing it for other people does not change the nature of what you're actually doing. Okay? Alright, it doesn't make much sense to talk about an irrational instance of procrastination as altruism, because there's no other who is supposedly benefiting from it. Well, again, the supposed benefit, it's just the motive of the action doesn't change the nature of the action. So quit worrying about other people. Quit worrying about whether or not anyone benefits from it or is even supposed to benefit from it. Okay? The motivation of the action does not change the nature of the action. Alright? The concept of altruism as everyone uses it, well, the concept of selfishness as everyone uses it, including Rand, is different from your take on it. The way you're describing it, you're actually depriving the English language of a way to succinctly refer to the ethics of putting other people before oneself. No, remember I said that ethically we can still talk about the motivations of people in altruism. That's fine. We can still say ethically they were motivated by this or that. You want to point to motivation in ethics, fine. I'm not, and then she says you're making the concept too broad. I'm not broadening the concept. I'm pointing out that the concept of altruism isn't really a legitimate concept. What the guy really should have formed his concept around is irrationality or self-destructive action, because that's really what the concept amounts to. There isn't actually anything in reality that amounts to actions that are pointed towards other people or other people directed. Okay? That is not true. Alright? That is a floating abstraction. There are no such actions. So, altruism is a floating abstraction. It's not true. There are no actions that are directed at other people. What would that mean? You doing stuff specifically for other people? Why? Because you think it's important. You're doing it for you. You're doing it for your ethical reasons. You're doing it because you want them to be benefited. So there's no such thing as other-directed action, really. It's just a misnomer. All right. Irrationality. No, okay, so the way that Rand uses it. Well, you know, I'm saying, has any other objectivist ever said this? Did Rand say it? Did Peikoff say it? Am I making a mistake saying it? Right? That's why I've put it out here to the objectosphere. So I'm going through this. I'm seeing what we have here. Rand, as far as I know, did not use altruism as a synonym for irrationality, as far as metaphysics and epistemology go. But, am I depriving the English language of a way to succinctly refer to the ethics of putting other people before oneself? You cannot succinctly refer to the ethics of putting other people before oneself. It's a mess when you do that. Whenever you do that, you're in a mess. You're in a contradictory mess. So, what I would be doing, okay, so if I change the word selfish to mean a virtue, then I would be depriving the English language of a way to refer to harming other people while trying to help yourself. Right? But harming other people while trying to help yourself is not a legitimate concept. That's not an objective concept. Okay? And the ethics of putting other people before oneself is not a legitimate concept. Okay? Ethics is the science of acting rationally to benefit oneself and one's life. Okay? So, putting other people before oneself would be anti-ethical. So that's not an ethical concept. So we're talking about a package deal or a floating abstraction. Okay? That's what altruism really is, if I'm right, that altruism essentially cannot be separated from irrationality. Irrationality is a great word, so is altruism. Why is altruism a great word? What is its meaning? What is its definition? Other-directed action. That is not true. There's no such thing as other-directed action. There's only actions that you choose for your own reasons. And you might do things to or for other people, but you yourself did them and you yourself chose them. So I cannot find altruism. I can't find it. Alright, squashing them together as if they were the same thing makes communication confusing. Why? Why would it make communication confusing if every time somebody said the word altruism, you immediately snapped your fingers at them and said, aha, you're talking about irrationality? I think that this would add clarification, not confusion. Okay? It doesn't add anything to our understanding of ethics. Yes, it does. Every time somebody says altruism, you just snap your fingers and say, you mean irrationality. You mean self-destruction. So it does add to understanding of ethics, okay? And it might even muddy the waters further, which we hella don't need. Alright, you would have to say how it muddies the waters, because I believe that it adds the clarifications which I just mentioned. AIM says 9-9 gets it exactly. Chris Ewing says 9-9 makes sense to me. So, for 4 objectivists against Mr. Cropper, I'm in a pretty rough state right now. But, there we go. This is part 3. Altruism and irrationality. Are they or are they not identical? Altruism is an ethical theory whose metaphysical and epistemological nature is irrationality. Cannot be separated from or differentiated from irrationality. As an ethical theory, you can point out people's motivations, but that does not change the nature of their actions. The nature of their actions is metaphysically and epistemologically irrational self-destruction. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Mr. Cropper. If you appreciate what I do, please patronize me. I'm trying to get to $600 or $800 a month so that I can do this regularly without worrying about whether or not this is a waste of my time and am I being stupid and altruistic and self-sacrificial to sit here and make videos for hours and hours and hours. So jump on Patreon and make me feel like I'm justified if you appreciate what I'm doing. Thank you. Mr. Cropper out.